All right, so let's go ahead and get started. Hello and welcome everyone to the Gerontological Society of America's Grant Chat. No researcher is an island developing your research team. I am Dr. Gail Towsley, Associate Professor at the University of Utah College of Nursing. GSA's Grant Chat is a grant writing series of 1-hour virtual sessions designed to bolster a broad range of grantsmanship skills specifically tailored to your work as a gerontologist researcher. GSA Grant Chats feature panel discussions with peers, experienced researchers, and leaders in gerontology, and offer the opportunity to connect with and learn from a wide spectrum of experts in aging science. Today's Grant Chat explores tips for developing the research team needed to support a successful grant application and research program. Before we begin today's program, I would like to provide a few logistical considerations. Please introduce yourself in the chat and use the chat box throughout the presentation to comment or ask questions. Please keep your audio muted until it's time for discussion. The Grant Chat is being recorded and will be available after the event on the GSA website. I am joined today by GSA members Dr. Zachary Baker, Robert Kane Postdoctoral Fellow, School of Public Health, University of Minnesota, and Dr. Patty Slatum, Visiting Scholar at GSA and Professor at the Virginia Center on Aging, Virginia Commonwealth University, who will serve as co-moderators and are part of the work group planning these sessions. To open today's Grant Chat, I would like to introduce our panelists. We are delighted to have a distinguished group of GSA members with us to share their experiences on building your research team. Our panelists have experience in team science, have been part of collaborative team projects, and have published on their experiences. First, we welcome Dr. Tulika Garg, Associate Professor, Department of Urology, Penn State College of Medicine. We also welcome Dr. Lana Sargent, Assistant Professor, School of Nursing and Affiliate Faculty, Geriatric Pharmacotherapy Program, Core Faculty, Institute for Inclusion, Inquiry, and Innovation at the Virginia Commonwealth University. And we also welcome Dr. Jasmine Travers, Assistant Professor from the Rory Myers College of Nursing, New York University. We look forward to an engaging and enlightening conversation.
Okay, great. Thanks to everybody for being here, and thank you to our panelists. So we'll kick it off with a few questions that we've put together, and please feel free to drop questions in chat, as Gail mentioned, and we'll make sure to work those in too. To start out, if each of you could just briefly describe your experience in developing a research team for aging research. It would be pretty broad here to begin. Jasmine, why don't you start for us?
Sure, everyone. So I am in my second year as an assistant professor and have had to develop research teams for a number of different projects, both formal and informal. So currently I have a K-76 that is funded by National Institutes on Aging. That's a career development award, but provides a little bit more money than the traditional career development award. And that is primary data collection in nursing homes with the dementia population. So it's a big project, but because I have extra funds and I was able to use funds from another career development award through RWJF, I was able to hire a project manager. So out of all of the other team members that I will talk about today, I think the project manager has been key. So if you are able to find funds in any capacity, and if you're able to do so to fund a full-time project manager, I would very much encourage you to do so, especially if you're early on in your career, at any point in time in your career, because there are so many little things, little tasks, IRB renewals, so many things that need to be done that you don't need to be doing as a scientist, and your project manager can really help with those types of things, recruitment, so many different things. So that's been just a dream to have. Then also, with my team, thinking about the population that I'm focused on. So I'm focused on the Black and Latino population. where I did not want to limit my the language of those who I would be recruiting. So I wanted to also have Spanish speaking older adults in my sample. So my project manager, she is Spanish speaking. So that allowed for me to kind of kill two birds in one stone and be able to still access a larger population and more diverse populations. So that's another thing when thinking about team members and being able to have team members that are kind of concordant in some ways, whether it's through language or race, ethnicity. For example, my team also, since this is a K award, consists of a mentoring team and an advisory team. I have an 8-person team for my K76, which is a lot. So it's 5 mentors and 3 advisors, but each of them play a particular role. And I'm going to just explain them and then I'll hand it off so that others can kind of talk about their teams. But thinking about all of the different needs of my team. So when it comes to the methodological needs, as well as the content needs. So I'm going into a new space when it comes to the dementia population, the nursing home population, primary data collection population. So making sure that I have mentors in all of those areas to support those activities. I also proposed to do a psychometric development, instrument development. So I needed psychometric analysis experience. So although I said I was going to be, taking courses in survey design and such, I do have a mentor that is an expert in instrument development. So he will be supporting those activities. And then the advisory board team are people who are going to serve as liaisons when it comes to supporting different activities. So for example, nursing home recruitment, I have an advisory board member who is on boards of many nursing homes. So she has helped with connecting me to nursing homes, especially in this time of the pandemic where nursing homes have often been closing their doors to researchers. And I've been able to have an in and kind of establish relationships with those. So those are some of the just the spaces where I am kind of developing teams. And I'll just stop there and talk a little bit more about my other team experience later.
Thank you, Jasmine. That's a bigger team than even I realized. And I will say, Jasmine's not just putting on airs for this talk. We were eating dinner a couple weeks ago, and she gave the same advice about a project coordinator and how life-changing they are at that dinner. So, Talika, could you tell us a little bit about your team and kind of how you thought about making that team?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a urologist, and so I'm pretty new to aging research. And what I found is early on in my clinical practice, I really was taking care of a lot of older adults with cancer, urologic cancer, specifically bladder cancer, and finding that it was really difficult to help them make treatment decisions. They were facing a lot of burdens around their care. And I just got very interested in their stories and what they were dealing with. And I wanted to find ways to help them. And just very serendipitously, I attended a meeting of the NIA-funded Aging Initiative Network, where I felt like I found my people. And I realized that I could develop a research team around some of these questions that I had, even though I was a urologist. And so I connected with a mentor who's a methodologist in aging research. And then it sort of snowballed from there, where I found other mentors in geriatric oncology, which, I mean, it's not a surgical field, but it's still, there were so many principles that were directly applicable to what I was doing. And we kind of worked together to create something new within my field. And they were really instrumental in helping me to define the research questions and in helping me refine my thinking around those topics that I didn't have a lot of experience in. And then I would absolutely echo what Jasmine said about the project coordinator. So my first few years in research and clinical practice, I did everything by myself. And whether that was submitting IRBs, trying to put together budgets for grants, et cetera. And once I was able to get a little bit of funding for a project coordinator, it really was life altering, because then I had more opportunities to focus on the science. But my project coordinator is also just an incredible partner, wonderful sounding board for different ideas. She gives me great feedback on what's going on with the patient, since I do primary data collection, and helps me to refine different methods for recruiting and retaining patients into research studies. I think having a project coordinator and other members of your team and thinking of them as partners is really important, because it just helps your research to grow and to burgeon. So that's been my experience. I really am a big fan of the NIA funded networks, because I really gained a lot from that, and it's just kind of spread from there. Thank
you. So definitely we all need a coordinator. And Lana, please.
Yeah, sure. So I'm an assistant professor at the School of Nursing, and have quite a few teams that I work with, and I can relate to what's already been talked about. Often writing a grant and having to think about structure, roles, skills, and disciplines, right? And then organizing all of those things. But I think probably one of my most rewarding experiences has been with iCubed. And that's really a team that has been formed around solving large aging problems, in which we have these large aging issues, and we have a bunch of disciplines in the room, and then we have to think about how our disciplines actually fit together to solve those problems, which is a little different than kind of creating a team around a grant. You're have this issue or a community issue that's being brought up, and then you have all these different disciplines with different agendas in the room with their own research. And I think that has been probably one of the most rewarding team-based experiences that I've had, because those things take a little bit longer to develop. They don't have a timeline with them like a grant does, where you say, I have this K or this R01 that has to be built, and I have to put this team together and think about people within their roles or their structure. Often for us, it has been about getting to know each other, really getting to know each other's disciplines and what our individual needs have been for our own trajectory in our own career process, and how we might be able to help each other along that path. And so such that work has evolved. We have two large collaboratives now that are moving forward. One is the Richmond Brain Health Initiative, and it has an interdisciplinary group of individuals. And then we have another one called the Translational Approaches to Personalized Health, all funded, each one of us taken different aspects of funding to move that project along. So sometimes one of us will take the PI position, and other members will take different roles and shift our roles. And then another grant comes along, say that we've basically exasperated or kind of worked our way through the internal mechanisms. And so someone else will take a role on a lead mechanism that is outside, depending on the discipline or the focus of the grant. And then we shift our roles again, and all again, the funding is going towards that moving that collaborative forward, keeping that funding going. We often have lots of discussions about sort of where someone is in their tenure process, right? Or where the postdoc is going to go, and how that research may help the postdoc and what position we put them in on that grant to help them move that forward. So it's a lot of that has been one of the most rewarding experiences for me, because we have these two collaboratives that we've been able to keep moving forward, but everyone is able to sort of share their role depending on what the grant call is, and also thinking about our career development. I would say that I did recently an R01, and it was very isolating. I like the title of this the seminar that we're having today, because it was the first grant that I had written completely alone, because I had done so much team-based writing, and we, with all these grants, we've been able to separate it out and sort of take each other's a piece of it and move it forward. So that was my first experience of putting a team together around a problem versus putting it around a grant. And then those out of that problem, whatever that community need was, were sort of the grants arose, and then we had to really get to know each other's individual skills to decide, and honestly our career trajectories and how we could help each other out and how we could shift those roles to help everyone out. And in that process, 2 of us have gone up for tenure successfully. We're both hoping to hear this June. And we have a postdoc that's getting ready to move into her second postdoc and has found a really interesting topic throughout that process. And so you could see this really beautiful, sort of collaborative that happens over time when you start to really get to know each other. Versus certainly we have to put things together around grants, but it's very different when you're put together and really get to know each other and sort of see it as a team-based movement that happens to solve a problem, but think about it within the context of your own career trajectory at the same time.
Have to remember to mute. Thank you so much, Lana. Our next question is, how do you decide the number of team members and who you need on the team? So you've talked a little bit about this, but if there's something, a specific example you could provide, that would be great. Tulika, should we start with you this time?
Sure. So I think the main thing about deciding number of team members is what your needs are up front, whether that's topic area, methods, and then what you need for boots on the ground to help you accomplish the research. And I think it varies based on what your research experience is and what your bandwidth is, and also what the topic is. If you are maybe transitioning into an area that's new to you or kind of tangential to where you're at, maybe you need a larger team to kind of help you to develop the idea and to implement it. But maybe if it's a small contained project, then maybe you don't need as large of a team. I think it's hard to say exactly how many people you would need, but I think it's more based on expertise and then what you really need to get the project done, and within the time frame and within the budget that you have.
And Lana, or Jasmine, you're unmuted. Do you want to go next?
Sure. I just wanted to echo what Tulika said in regards to thinking about the funding mechanism and the amount of funds you are going to have, and kind of balancing that with the needs that you have with the grant and what the expertise is needed. So it's going to be difficult if it's a pilot award for you to have a large team, right? So you have to really prioritize, what is the most, what do I need to prioritize when thinking about either methods or support, and how much do you want to be doing versus someone else to be supporting you in those needs as well is going to be important. And then thinking about the types of projects. So if it's like large scale data analysis using publicly available data or national data, then you might not need as big of a team. But if it's primary data collection across multiple sites, then it probably would require more team support. And then with the funding mechanism, if it's a K award, they're going to want for you to really be, spot on that like number of team members, who those team members are they, the cream of the crop, and what that looks like, as opposed to like a foundational grant, maybe, or a smaller pilot award.
I think I can add to that to say that the other really important thing that people are looking for, especially reviewers, is that everyone has a distinct role, and that each one of those roles add some value to the overall grant, right, or the overall goal of that, and that it's going to help, whether it's the K, that you have distinct mentors that fit into each one of those mentoring buckets that you're going to get, or if it's a specific grant in which each individual has a role, that's what they're going to be looking for, and that role be distinct, and that you can describe it, and that they have the background and the expertise to fill that role.
Our next question you've all kind of touched on already. I want to ask about funding, but specifically I want to ask about continuation of funding, right? Because bring somebody in on a grant, we don't want to tell them in 3 or 5 years that, okay, no money for you anymore. So Jasmine, you talked about pulling from multiple mechanisms, and Lana, you've talked about stepping forward and stepping back through iCubed, but also looking at R01 level funding, and Talika, thinking about shifting between settings. So yeah, I'm curious to hear what each of you think about that continuation of funding and how you strategize.
Yeah, so for me, I just started, I'm in year 1 of my K award out of 5 years, and I feel the pressure to have funding for my project manager, after that. So I am in the process of developing an R01. It might seem early, but it takes time for these things to, get funded. If it gets funded on the first time, great, but really kind of anticipating that second or third time. And then that would kind of bring me to the 5th year. So to make sure that their funding is there. But definitely right now, my project managers support is across 2 grants. After that, or I also applied for an internal award for another pilot award, and we'll put a percentage of her effort on that. And I figured I would be able to use other pilot mechanisms if need be, or other like foundational grants, apply for those to kind of support her effort, but it won't provide full-time effort, I don't suspect, but that is something that is important with the continued funding.
I'll add to that. Both of the collaboratives I spoke about, at any given number of times, we have 2 or 3 grants that are supporting both of those collaboratives. And they're usually led by different PIs within the group, right? And shared across disciplines often. And so that means that we're doing a lot of this shifting of resources. So when one funding stream runs out and cards are no longer available for recruitment, then we shift to another grant and pull cards from that grant, or shift resources. Another thing that we've been doing quite frequently is even within our school, we are writing to support within our budgets a coordinator. You all have talked about how important a coordinator is, but to have a trained coordinator who's already up and running, who you don't have to hire another person to do that same thing over and over again. So we're putting our resources together to basically everyone writes into their grant funding for that coordinator. And that coordinator's time is split across multiple grants that match their expertise. And that's a way to use some team-based resources to keep projects moving consistently while not being the sole pressure of having to carry all of that funding, that everyone's kind of sharing that shouldering that burden of keeping that funding going. So we've come up with a lot of strategies to do that type of budgeting, to kind of keep projects going within our teams, and that has been hugely helpful, because again, you don't want to lose the people that are trained, and once you get someone who can do the IRB and do all the protocols and help, and actually if you're doing any community-based work, knows the community and the community knows them, and they know how to get a hold of them, and they have that phone number, you don't want to lose them. And so, but it can be really hard sometimes with funding mechanisms, and knowing whether or not you're going to get funded, and when one runs out and the next one starts. So we do a lot of this sharing, and again, it can be done well even across disciplines. So I work pretty heavily with the School of Pharmacy, and we just shift funding and resources as things come up. The other thing I would say that's pretty important is having a plan of publication and grant process. Like Jasmine, you already mentioned you're thinking about an R01. It's never too early, right? Like the year that you're rolling out your grant, implementing, you're thinking about what's your publication list to help support the next grant. Like you already write that next step into your grant, right? You already say what your next step is going to be. You have to let the data tell you what is really feasible for that next step, but eventually you already kind of know where you're going. So I think it is important to put that plan in place with your team, and who's going to take that next step, so you can split up the workload. So if if it is a couple publications, you put that publication table together and everyone takes a piece so that you can start to get those publications out to support the next grant. So having those things in place are incredibly important to just keeping the ball rolling and moving.
I agree with everything that's been said. I think finding, you're going to kind of try to cover that person with your existing grants and what you're writing, but also I think there's a lot of power in collaboration. And, I've been a site PI on a couple studies and been able to fund my research coordinator's time on those. And it's just kind of pulling from different grants and different pots of money. And I would just say, if there are any clinicians listening, and, for people who are kind of looking at their first faculty jobs or anything like that, I think it's helpful to try to identify whether there's some infrastructure that exists and maybe is already funded by the department or funded by grants that you can kind of pull a little bit of help from as well, and kind of plug into what's already existing. And then as you get your grants and get funding, then you can kind of spin off on either your own person or, kind of helping to fund that person's time as well. I think, being able to fund that person actually, I think, also helps to beget further funding, because they're helping you to accomplish the research, get the papers out, get the grants in. And so I think the idea is that ultimately it kind of helps to fund itself as well.
I'd like to just add on to that. We've been talking about a data, coordinator, research coordinator as being a key position, but I would also say data manager is really key too. You can get to that phase where you can support a data manager. And with our team, we only have one school that has the data manager, and she's been maintaining this database for a very long time. And we've harnessed those resources to get her covered too. So when someone from another discipline writes a grant, they write her in for 2 to 3%, right? Just to get that person covered and keep that going. So I completely agree with what you're saying, Talika, on that. It's really important. And at your university, sometimes you have resources that they'll put towards for in kind, right? You can write them in kind, meaning you don't have to cover them, and they already have the expertise. The other point I think you made up that I just wanted to point out, it's really strong. If you can name somebody and say that person has been working with you all along, and you put them on your grant, it's much stronger than saying to be named, right? To be hired. So yes, maintaining that helps, like you said, beget the next step, because it shows that you've been able to maintain that team.
Thank you. And I think you must have known as part of our next question, but which is to thinking about what incentives can you use to start building the team before you have funding. So all of you have funding right now, but when we think about building a team before we have funding, what kind of incentives might be used?
I could start with that one. So I think couple things. So thinking about kind of like mentors or any key personnel level expertise, I think getting them excited about your topic and getting them excited about you as an investigator, I think is really important. And I think trying to help them see the future value of investing in that line of research. I think it's a little bit of maybe salesmanship, but I think it helps to get them excited about or intellectually excited about the topic and about you. And I think making a plan and having a clear idea of, well, this is the grant we want to apply for. I want to engage you to be part of this, and we're going to fund some of your time on this. I think having that kind of incentive, I think, is also helpful. And And then as far as, for the research team and your research staff, I mean, I think, trying to find a few little pots of money somewhere to at least kind of get things off the ground. Sometimes you can get some small internal, funding, like at Geisinger, we had some small pots of money where you could, like $2,000-$3,000, where you could just fund a little bit of time for somebody to help you submit a grant or to help you get a manuscript out, or, for any kind of a small contained project to get you to that next step, has been helpful as well.
Just to add to that, I would say co-authorship of any manuscripts that may be coming out early on, if that is a potential. I've had teams early on in the COVID pandemic, like access to data and being able to just use that quick primary data was an incentive for a lot of us on that team. And each of us took a lead on a paper, and it was about 5 of us. So all of us had a paper that we led, but also 4 other papers that we co-authored in a matter of a few months early on in the pandemic. So that was a great incentive. Another thing is to be able to add items to a survey or an instrument that you may be putting out. So if you're like, oh, okay, I'm doing this pilot study and I have a survey and I'm looking for people to work with, people always want to add items to surveys. So that could be an incentive as well. And then, like Talika said, just kind of getting people excited, making meetings fun, making that team fun, thinking about people who you enjoy working with, so it doesn't really feel like a work or a burden. And maybe even little things like sending people gift cards for like Starbucks or something like that, or lunch. I've been getting like Grubhub gift cards to go purchase lunch during like the lunch hours. So that is a nice touch as well. I mean, that could be out of your pocket, or if you have some discretionary funds, you can do that. But those are some other ideas to kind of think about. And then you could also offer to, kind of be a resource to them in areas they may need support in, whether it be a review of a manuscript that they have, eyes on something, or just a general resource. Or even one more thing, guest lecture in a class that they may have as well. That's also maybe a good incentive, just to say, you know what, if there's anything that I can do for you, please let me know.
So we've generally had the nice and the positive. How do you get people on your team, and how do you keep them on your team? And I guess a worthwhile question to ask, but a little bit of a darker question, is how do you know when it's time to end a partnership or a team, or move on?
I can speak to that. Sometimes it's just organically the topic, or the thing that you're studying has kind of reached its end, or people make a turn in a different direction and it no longer is a match for your collaboration on things. You've kind of finished out writing the papers, and because very frequently many of our collaborators have multiple collaborations going on themselves. So sometimes their time runs out and they make a turn. So that's been my experience mostly, is that often when we have multiple collaborations, those people have other collaborations, and sometimes, you finish out your project and other things take precedent for them. They get a new grant or something, happens that pulls them away. I would encourage people, unless, it's an end and a definitive end, like someone leaves or they're or it's a toxic situation. Otherwise, there really is no ending. It's really just a shift, and that there's always the possibility of coming back to doing work again together. So sometimes it's really just kind of where things ebb and flow, where the funding is and where your work is focused. So I would encourage people to think about them not as necessarily ending, but just changing the focus of things or changing where you spend your time just based on what the topics are that you're studying. There is, of course, the darker side that we didn't talk about, which is sometimes when you have to end a situation because it might be toxic or isn't working, or you end up in a really tough situation with publication, or you just didn't like the way things went down. That sometimes that has to happen too, just like in any situation. And you cordially just move away from that and maybe turn your sights towards something new, right, and different.
Yeah, I guess I would say like that darker side stuff, which thankfully I haven't had to really get in the weeds with yet. And I don't want to say yet at all. But thinking about ethical issues, data issues, reporting issues that may be something that you cannot just like reconcile. Thinking about just like unresolvable conflicts, work not being done. So if, an individual is supposed to be responsible for whatever different activities, depending on who they are, whether they're a co-investigator, whether they are, a biostatistician, a programmer, any of those people, if they're supposed to be doing work and despite, multiple conversations, then that's another thing to think about if that's a person that you can continue with. And then just, different like boundaries being crossed on a continuous basis, whether it includes ethical boundaries. I've been on teams where we've collected surveys and we contracted someone out to do the survey data collection, and they were actually fudging some of the surveys where they were filling out the surveys themselves and not actual participants. So things like that, you have to really kind of just provide oversight, because we talk about, building the team and kind of, allowing different team members to take ownership of different aspects of the grant. But then at the same time, we have to make sure that there are checks and balances in place to make sure that we are, things are still running ethically and responsibly.
Yeah, and I'll just follow that up with a resource. Every university or hospital system should have a Department of Ethics. So if you ever find yourself in a situation in which you have a conflict like that crosses over into boundaries of which become concerning, you can reach out to them and consult with them about the issue, and they can provide whether it's a publication or an issue around data collection or improper reporting of data. Every institution that has some research entity going on has a Department of Ethics, and they should be a resource for everyone. That would be the place to go first if you don't go within your own department.
I just from a standpoint of kind of like personality conflicts or, or like work not getting done. I think one of the things to kind of keep in mind is, certainly over the last couple of years, it's just been an incredibly stressful time for so many people. And I think a lot of these people that you're working with are people you've worked with for years, or, have really good faith in. And sometimes it's good to give people the benefit of the doubt when it comes to, some of like personality conflicts or, getting work done, and sometimes just taking a compassionate approach and sitting down and talking with them and just saying, hey, like, what's going on? Is something we could talk through here? Is your workload too much? What's going on in your life? Can we talk about it and figure out some way to keep you as a valuable person on the team and make it fun again? So I think sometimes taking sort of the managerial direct approach with compassion can be helpful too.
Great feedback. What recommendations do you have for building your skills in team science?
So one thing that I've done a lot of in the last few years is I like to read a lot of like leadership and business management books and podcasts. I love like Adam Grant and Daniel Pink. Somebody cued me into this podcast called Manager Tools, which is a wonderful podcast that's been very long running, and they have some really great podcasts on feedback and weekly check-ins and things like that. And it's sort of like a take it or leave it kind of thing. You try different things and see what works and what doesn't. I think there's a lot we can learn from the business world actually about how to run teams effectively. And I'm still definitely in the learning phase of all of this, but those are some of the tools that have helped me. And I think I know there's some other resources through NIH that are going to go out as part of this grant chat that I think have also been wonderful resources. I think it's a burgeoning field, studying the science of team science. I think there's a lot more to come in the coming years.
Yeah. So for me, when I was building after I was awarded my K-76, I started meeting with mentors, and in different meetings with other mentors, I would say to them, this is the biggest thing that I want to focus on when it comes to team management and thinking about building a team for my R01. So I would just kind of get all of their, pros and cons and pearls of wisdom when it comes to building a team and how I should approach that. So when thinking about the people who I was going to hire as well, like how do you set that environment? What are the checks and balances that you should be having in place? How often you should be meeting with your team? What does communication look like at different points in time? So that was something that was very helpful for me to build. And that was actually a training aim, or part of a training aim on my K when it came to like team science. So there was a book also that I proposed to read for my K. It's called Making the Right Moves, a practical guide to scientific management, and has a number of different resources and information on there about building teams, managing teams, as well as other aspects that is important to just researchers growing in the field. And then just attending webinars that are focused on building teams such as this, but I've been to other webinars as well that have been very helpful. And I've taken a lot from that. And then, speaking to your peers who are also on teams and really kind of getting an understanding of what they're experiencing with their teams, what's been going well, what's been not going so well. And I would agree with the whole like management and leadership kind of courses or seminars or development programs are key as well when kind of engaging with research teams and building teams. Same types of concepts.
We just had a question. Oh, Patty, what do you think about more formally evaluating your team process? So maybe this feeds into the the different management strategies. Maybe this feeds into when it's time to end a team, or do you have formal evaluations? Do you have plans in mind for them?
I could talk about that. We did that for our team. We were all required to take some team science training when we all got together. So just the resources that were just talked about. Team science has become a really big part of NIH and the grant writing process. So if you're writing NIH grants, they're going to be looking for you to have some of that expertise if you're leading a team. So definitely look out for. It's important to note here as we talk about that this are people dedicating their lives to transdisciplinary research and understanding how to measure the outcomes of transdisciplinary research. So there are a few tools out there. We did undertake this both in a qualitative and quantitative way, not formally, with our own iCube group, sort of de-identified, surveyed our team on what aspects we thought were working about the transdisciplinariness of our team and what things were not. And there were quite a few themes that arose out of that, and we published a paper about it. I would say that since I'm not a transdisciplinary researcher, I learned a lot in that process. I also learned that there is a whole field of people dedicating their life to this. I hope that what will come out of that will be some tools. There are a few out there, quantitative tools, survey tools that teams can use to evaluate their own team. That was one of the things that I learned through that process that I was hoping would come out of it in the future, because I do think it was helpful to our team, and I would have liked to see it going, except for I wasn't the one who could lead it. I guess that kind of goes along a little more in our conversation of like how you decide when something ends. I didn't feel at that point, although I had led and kind of co-led that process, I didn't feel like I could take it that next step. I really felt like the next step really needed to be someone who had transdisciplinary, team-based expertise in research to take it that next stage. However, in the initial phase, it was really helpful for us just organically to do a de-identified survey in which people did not, felt like they in a safe space, they could talk about what the experience was. And then we took those themes and fed them back to the group in a qualitative way to allow some discussion and problem solving at that point. So here it is that we have this theme that came up. How do people want to go about trying to solve this? How are we going to, fix this? Or can we really? Is it more structural and so forth and kind of leadership above us? So we found that experience really helpful. But again, I think it's important to note that there really is a whole discipline out there that's developing these tools, and probably just keep your eyes out on the literature, because there probably will be some tools that you could use within your own teams coming up. And then I should say, I started with a formal process, but I also think it's just, Talika, you mentioned just being open and transparent. Is this all working for you all on a regular basis? Is this team structure working? Does someone else want to lead this process? Just trying to keep communication open and clear, allowing for some time at the end of meetings to do sort of a muddy waters like we do sometimes in lecture positions, like is this all working for everyone? And maybe again, like you said, using some of that management skills, touching base individually with members on your team and making sure that the workload and everything is working. So it doesn't have to be so formal all the time. It can be sort of a more formal, qualitative, sort of process.
Jasmine, looks like you're unmuted. Did you have something you wanted to add to that?
Sure. I was just thinking about when first setting up teams and starting projects, I like to kind of formally discuss, what are the expectations from you as a team member so that we're all on the same page. And then if we have to have any, conversations down the line, then we can kind of revisit, what we talked about earlier on and kind of where we are right now. So just kind of evaluating that process and what people are contributing. And I agree with Talika with regards to how you approach that, with definitely compassion and, just seeking to understand as opposed to blame or, convict anyone. So I really like that approach and feel like it's very important. But having that formal process when you're kind of setting, this is what I want to see from you, and even kind of say, what these expectations look like with regards to time as well, because you do have to put things out for the grant at specific times, but not being, of course, so rigid and allowing that flexibility for things that kind of happen in one's life is important.
Talika, do you have any further thoughts on more formal process evaluation or anything like that?
Yeah, I'm actually learning a lot from Lana and Jasmine on this, because I think we have formal, I guess, performance reviews with team members, and of course, we all receive formal performance reviews, about our own work. And I think this is a really interesting space that's going to develop, because it's not thinking about just each individual, but thinking about how that effective that team is. I'm still not really sure how that would be defined and how it would be measured, but I think it's a space that is going to be really interesting in the future, and I think it's going to be important as the focus on team science continues to grow.
Well, thank you. We're at 3:51 now, or 3:51 Central Time. To bring our session to a close today, I ask each of our panelists to share a final pearl of wisdom about developing your research team. Talika, let's start with you, please.
Sure. I think my main pearl of wisdom is that working with a team to address the scientific issue or health issue is really fun, and don't lose sight of the fun part of it and how you're all going to work together to grow intellectually and to address something that's really important to patient care. And that's really ultimately the North Star of your team.
Yes, I'll go ahead and go. Thanks. I would say one thing is, while if you're the person who's kind of shepherding this team and it's like a project that you're working on, recognizing that the person that is also on that team, or the person probably have goals as well, and kind of understanding what they want to see out of that team collaboration. So if it's a co-investigator, they may be interested in conducting some primary data collection because they've never interviewed that population before or something like that. What are they, really wanting to get out of this project aside from, what you probably said that they would be doing? So that's something that's good. Another thing, like my project manager, she said for her, she wanted to become a project director, like in the next couple of years. So that's been on my mind, to make sure that I'm able to elevate her to that role if possible, but really understanding what are the goals and expectations and desires of your team as well, so you can support that and continue to foster that fun and exciting environment that you want to create.
I would echo the fun part. It's an opportunity to really get to know people in a different way. So don't miss out on the opportunity to get to know them. I think during COVID, we've especially experienced that because we've been in each other's homes and with their families in the background. But the other thing I would add to it is that team-based research is really shared leadership. We're moving from a model of PI specific directed, that person leading everything, to especially with transdisciplinary research, to more shared leadership. And that is more of a shifting depending on the work that's happening, and allows people to really take, like you mentioned, Jasmine, take these lead roles. And so just keeping in mind within the team that it's not one person necessarily that really should be leading this whole effort, that we're all in this together, and it's a shared leadership process.
there's some solid pearls of wisdom to take away. When it's like when you started with that, I was like, that's going to be tough to top, but that was effective. Good on all of you. As a next step in exploring this topic, we take a look at the resources posted in the chat. I posted those a couple of minutes ago. These include a team science toolkit from NIH, a handbook on team science success, a guide to scientific management for postdocs and new faculty, and publications authored by our panelists to learn more about their work. You can see those there. And please join me in thanking our panelists for generously sharing their time, experience, and perspectives with us today. Thank you also to the moderators and work group members who planned the grant chat. Thanks to you, our participants, for your questions and comments, and a big thank you to Judy Liu from GSA for the behind the scenes coordination that made this grant chat possible. We'll send out a brief survey following the event for you to provide your feedback and help us in planning future grant chats. And I can tell you, Gail and Patty and I and Judy all pour through those and really do pay a lot of attention to them. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.